This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all, and welcome to the very many who appear to be joining us online. My name is Vincent Durack. I'm the moderator for the session today. I'm in the School of Politics and International Relations in UCD, but I don't know why I said that, because it's not about me today. It's about our guest, Ali Vaez. And it's difficult to think of a topic that's more timely and more pressing than the question that Ali is, I think, going to answer today. The Iran war, what happens next? This is something, obviously, that has had devastating consequences for Iran and for the region, but has global repercussions as well. So, as I say, it's hard to think of a question that is more significant, but also perplexing, to say the very, very least. And we're very lucky to have Ali with us. I'll say a few more words about his background in a few minutes, but just in terms of how we proceed, Ali is going to speak for 15, 20 minutes perhaps, to be followed by a Q&A with the audience. And for those of you in person, I just ask you to raise your hand and somebody will bring a mic to you. If you're online, he said, looking into, I don't know, the online space, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. And in either case, please identify yourself and your affiliation, if any. I'd also like to note that both the presentation and the Q&A will be recorded. Ali Vaez is, as I'm sure you all know, the International Crisis Group's Iran Project Director, Senior Advisor to the group's president. He led the crisis group's efforts to bridge the gap between the United Nations P5, the permanent members of the Security Council +1, i.e. Germany, in the landmark 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was agreed in 2015, as I say, and from which, of course, faithfully, the US withdrew during the first Trump administration, with consequences with which everybody is continuing to deal. Previously, Ali served as Senior Political Affairs Officer at the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, was Iran Project Director at the Federation of American Scientists, whose website, by the way, is an extraordinary resource if you're interested in these matters, which I assume everybody here is. He's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service, a fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is the co-author of How Sanctions Work, Iran and the Impact of Economic Warfare, which was published in 2024 by Stanford University Press. And on top of all of this, he has contributed on numerous occasions to media and other outlets, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Atlantic, Foreign Affairs. You've been busy. And I think one point to note here is that Ali is possessed of expertise both in terms of nuclear science and international relations. It's an extraordinary, useful, to say the very least, combination in these times, and one I think I can say that is rare in terms of reflections on what's been happening since February 28th. So over to you, Ali, if I may.
Thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. Yes, I've been busy for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately, especially over the past 3 months. But let me start by thanking the Institute for the invitation. It's an absolute honor to be here in this gorgeous building with this wonderful weather in Dublin. It's my first time visiting, so it's particularly really a great honor. There is a lot to talk about, but I thought maybe best way of getting us started is to talk a little bit about how we got to this point. In 2015, as you heard in my bio, I was involved in trying to mediate between the parties who were negotiating the nuclear deal with Iran. I work for a crisis group whose primary mandate is preventing conflicts from happening. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Because in order to prevent conflict from happening, based on the mantra that prevention is always better than cure. You have to really not just have your ear on the ground, understand what's happening, see the dark clouds gathering, but you also have to talk to all sides, understand their hopes and fears, understand what are the underlying reasons for how they see the world, their perceptions that you might fundamentally disagree with, but you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes, however disfigured or dirty there might be, but you have to be able to really see the world from their perspective. But that's not enough. You have to also come up with solutions. And these solutions have to be practical. They have to be based on realities, whether it's political imperatives, technically they have to be feasible, and so on. And we worked on this particular issue, the problem with Iran's nuclear program, really since the beginning, in 2003, when it was revealed that Iran had a secret nuclear weapons program. And Crisis Group's president at the time, Gareth Evans, former Foreign Minister of Australia, himself a non-proliferation statement, basically came up with the concept of the core of the bargain, which was nuclear restrictions and transparency measures in return for economic incentives with Iran. Now, that over the years has taken different forms, but the core, the base of the deal is always the same. In 2015, we finally got to a 159-page, very detailed agreement that did precisely that. Put Iran's nuclear program in a box under the most rigorous monitoring ever implemented anywhere in the world in return for sanctions relief. Now, the deal became a subject of political football in Washington, with Republicans, all of the Republicans in the Senate basically voting against it, even some prominent Democrats voting against it, Israel very strongly lobbying against it. At the time, I used to say the good news is that we have a nuclear deal. The bad news is that we only have a nuclear deal, because there are other problems with Iran. Iran's policies in the region, support for partners and proxies, Iran's human rights record, Iran's ballistic missile program. There were other problems. But the concept was you start with the most urgent, and then you try to address the more important issues and build on it. Basically, that the deal would be a floor, not a ceiling, for what you can do. But this was the first major agreement between Iran and the United States in 4 decades, obviously, and the West. And even you had the great powers, Russia and China, everybody was on the same page and involved. And so this was a good starting point. But that was not the interpretation in Washington and in Jerusalem. And so what happened was that in 2018, President Trump withdrew from the deal, reimposed sanctions. Iran waited for a year, hoping that the Europeans would deliver on their promises of trying to make up for the effects of reconstitution of U.S. sanctions. And I worked a lot with the Europeans in that period, only for them to realize that there is basically very little economic autonomy in the European Union. That at the end of the day, a lot of European companies care more about US rules and regulations, US sanctions, than they care about what their governments are asking them to do. I remember that the Iranian embassy in London, for instance, with the UK being one of the main negotiators of the deal, wanting the deal to work even without the United States, could not help open a bank account for the Iranian embassy. So they were using the cash that they needed for day-to-day functioning of the embassy in the basement. And the UK government just couldn't even convince banks in which it was the major shareholder to open a bank account for the Iranian government. Long story short, in 2019, after a year waiting for the Europeans to deliver, one end of the bargain was gone, no economic incentives. So the other end of the bargain started to fade away. Iranians basically put aside limitations and transparency measures. The nuclear program went from something that was fully transparent to something that was sort of opaque, translucent, and then finally very opaque. We had no really idea by 2021, 2022 what was happening in major parts of the program. Then, of course, we have the second Trump administration, but I want to jump just back to the Biden administration because they tried to restore the deal, but they couldn't because already in any kind of deal making, one key ingredient is trust, right? That you want to make sure that with the party that you negotiate, that the deals will have staying power. And the Iranians insisted on some sort of a guarantee from the Biden administration that if they negotiate a deal and once again roll back their nuclear program, the US would remain committed to an agreement. And believe it or not, there is no legal mechanism whatsoever in the United States that would bind a president to an international agreement. Even if you sign a treaty that would require 2/3 of Senate to confirm it, the president can get out of it with a stroke of a pen. So that was one of the reasons that we couldn't restore the deal in the Biden administration. But I think things got even worse because we only had one deal between Iran and the US in 2023, which was a prisoner swap deal combined with a humanitarian deal in which $6 billion of Iranian frozen assets, their own money, was moved from South Korea to Qatar, to Doha, in a humanitarian channel, which was supposed to be used only for purchase of food, medicine, and medical equipment. Now, remember that these are exempt from US sanctions. So the Iranians should have had access to this money for buying food and medicine anyways. But we created this very complex mechanism with Treasury Department having oversight over every single transaction that the Iranians would do, having veto power over it, and put it in place in Doha. Very complicated mechanism, took a lot of time to put it together. The deal was finalized mid-September 2023. A few weeks later, October 7th. October 7th happened. The Biden administration pulled the plug on Iran's ability to access the money, even though the deal had nothing to do with Iran's regional policies or support for Hamas, right? It was a humanitarian deal, and they had delivered on their end of the bargain. So another reason for mistrust. Then Trump comes in, and the Iranians, with all this mistrust, still re-engage in diplomacy, even though it appears not very serious on the US side. US negotiator didn't know the basics of the technicalities of the nuclear issue, of sanctions, would not be accompanied by, most of the time, by a team of experts. And in the middle of negotiations, after 5 rounds, when there was a text that the Iranians had presented, they said, well, see you next week to continue the conversations, only for Israel to start bombing them and for the US to join briefly, 45 minutes, bombing Iran's nuclear sites. That was last year. This year again, we had the exact same experience, a redux of it. In the middle of negotiations, promised to see each other next week. Again, a document that was coming together, only for the Iranians to be bombed a second time in the middle of negotiations, this time much more extensive. But look at the set of problems that we're dealing with now. Iran would not have a huge stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, which is very close to weapons grade. So enrichment is not a linear thing. It's very hard to get from raw uranium to 5%. It's much easier to get from 5% to 20%. It is even easier to get from 20% to 60%. And 60% to 90% is a small step. Basically, by the time you get to 60% enriched uranium, you've done the 99% of the job that is required to get to weapons grade uranium. Even with 60%, you can make a nuclear weapon. They have half a ton of 60%. They would not have had this if Trump had stayed in the deal, right? Because the restrictions on the level of enrichment, on the size of the stockpile, they were supposed to be in place until 2031. So by withdrawing from the deal, basically, the US brought forward the expiration of those limitations, and the Iranians basically started enriching to higher levels, and they had this stockpile. So we wouldn't have this stockpile if it weren't for Trump withdrawing from the deal. We would know where it is, and it would be under international monitoring if it wasn't because of the war last year, the 12-day war, because that's when the Iranians kicked out the IAEA inspectors, the UN nuclear inspectors, from their ability to monitor the fissile material. All of this, every gram of it, was constantly under UN inspections. Now, we have no idea where it is. The Strait of Hormuz, the most critical choke point in the world, was open for 47 years under this regime, the Iranian regime. With all the tensions they've had with the US, they've never closed it. Even last year in the war, they didn't close it. All right. With the US constantly choking their economy, they never closed it. They closed it this time around. And it gave them, basically demonstrated that they don't need to have a weapon of mass destruction because they have a weapon of mass disruption. They can basically hold the global economy hostage, right? Again, they wouldn't have had this if Trump had not attacked the second time. Third, we now have a much more radical Iranian regime in place. We've replaced an 86-year-old dying Ayatollah, the supreme leader, with his son, who's 56. We've eliminated almost everyone who had experience in international diplomacy, was a little bit more on the pragmatic side. I mean, I'm not describing them as moderates, but more pragmatic. And we've replaced them with hard men with guns. So all of these, the three category of problems, nuclear, the Strait of Hormuz, and a much more hardline regime, are of Trump's own creation. All right. So where do we go from here? I would say there are four options. One is for the president to agree to a deal that would be significantly worse than the deal he withdrew from, the JCPOA. Why do I say that? Because now, over the course of the past almost 2 months, the back and forth, which is happening through Pakistani mediators, is about a one-page document. 1 page, right? 14 points on a single page. And most of these points are so general, they're almost meaningless, right? I mean, like a declaration of an understanding about mutual non-aggression. What does that really mean? I mean, if you have a Security Council resolution, it's still not a guarantee that a ceasefire would hold, right? But on a piece of paper, both sides saying they would not threaten each other. Yeah, I mean, Trump might be able to sell it as a big victory, but is it really? There will be some details on the nuclear issue, but then you have to really negotiate the implementation of these commitments, which are very difficult. I just give you one example, again, about the stockpile, because that's really the shortcut the Iranians have to a nuclear weapon. So you first have to negotiate how, who, where is the stockpile? How are we going to get it out? Who is going to do it? This is probably under a mountain that was bombed last year. So somebody has to remove the rubble. There are unexploded ordinances in that area. We're talking about 5,000-pound bombs. You know, how do you neutralize that? How do you get it out? All of this has to happen under the UN inspector's watch. Then you have to account for the material. If instead of 440 kilograms, we find 400 kilograms, it's a disaster, right? Because you need 40 kilograms for a single nuclear weapon, right? Of 60% enriched uranium. Are the Iranians cheating, or is just, you know, the war has resulted in a situation that is just out of anybody's control, and 40 kilograms of 60% is missing? We've had serious tensions between Iran and the IAEA for many years over a few grams of unenriched uranium dating back from 20 years ago when Iran basically had a secret nuclear weapons program. Now, 40 kilograms of 60% if it's missing, it's a big deal. Then the Iranians probably would agree to send out some of this material to Russia as escrow. So it's out of their hands, but it will be returned to them if the US once again reneges on its commitments. Even though this is one of his sticking points, and at this moment, and Trump is insisting that he wants to have the dust, what he calls the dust. He sees it as the trophy that he can obtain in this war. And so this is still unresolved. But anyways, let's say it is half of it is sitting in Russia, half of it is going to be downblended, so it's no longer at 60%. For every installment that the Iranians ship out or they downblend, they would require significant sanctions relief and upfront because of their experience in the past. So all of this has to be negotiated, which would take months to negotiate, months to implement. This is one piece of this puzzle, right? So that's one concept, that you would get a deal that is, sort of a very broad, wishy-washy one page that might never go into phase 2 of a more detailed implementation plan. So a lot of the problems would remain unresolved. You might get the Strait of Hormuz reopened with the U.S. removing its blockade at the same time, gradually. But things are probably not going to go back to status quo ante. Iran would probably still maintain a degree of control over the Strait. Second option for the president, and again, that deal would be a hard sell. He's a master salesman, but it would be a hard sell because it's not really Iranian capitulation. It's not really a stronger non-proliferation agreement. It will have a lot of holes. It will not resolve anything. The second option is just to walk away and declare victory. The problem with that scenario is that as long as the Strait of Hormuz is closed, it's really hard to declare victory, right? Because basically you've given a third world power control over one of the most strategic choke points in the world. And you've demonstrated both to friends, allies, enemies, that the mightiest military in the world cannot open the Strait of Hormuz. And that's bad. So I don't think really walking away is an option, but it's one of the scenarios. Another option is a return to hostilities. And this could happen, honestly, as early as in the next few days. There are a lot of people around President Trump who are constantly telling him that there is still one more punch that you can deliver, and that would magically conjure victory for you. Because we remove some of these remaining Iranian leaders who are hardliners, they're lunatics. You remove them, it would basically result in everybody else coming to terms with the fact that they have to surrender to U.S. terms. It is not going to happen. I can just put it very simply to you that there is no amount of pressure, destruction of Iranian infrastructure, whatever the U.S. does, that would result in capitulation for this regime. They currently believe that they are winning. And even if they suffer more, the problem from their perspective is that they believe that the only thing that is more dangerous than suffering from U.S. strikes and pressure is surrendering to U.S. pressure, because that would only encourage the U.S. to ask for more, to move the goalposts, to continue the pressure. It would not result in alleviation of the pressure. So, yes, the president can strike again. It might get very ugly very quickly, but we will end up in the same place as we are today. It will not move the needle. We will have to decide whether we're going to get a bad deal, not an ideal deal, or walk away. And finally, the option is just, muddle through with the status quo. And that is going to be, honestly, a disaster for the world. There are a lot of countries that are running out of stockpiles of fertilizer, stockpiles of fuel. As you know, already in Europe, 20,000 flights have been canceled. We will be in much worse territory. We might have a global recession by the end of the summer if this problem is not resolved. Plus, politically, is bad for President Trump and the Republicans, given midterm elections in November. So we've ended up with a set of really, really bad options. I'm not going to be able to predict which one the president will choose, because all of it really depends on his mood on that particular day or particular hour, honestly. There's no policy process, there's no real well thought through approach and strategy here. And that's why, unfortunately, the situation is unpredictable. But again, it's hard to imagine that it would end well for the United States. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.